Hello. How is everyone? My name is Cleve Corner. I'm the manager of author and speaker engagement at the Pratt. Appreciate you coming out on a really rainy evening. Like, it got really wet really quick. I'm just going to do some general housekeeping. We're running just about a couple minutes late, but we'll start in about 3-4 minutes. First thing I just want to add is we're going to have about 40-minute conversation between Hera Morales and AJ Verdelle, followed by your questions. There are audience mics on the end of each aisle. We also have a virtual audience tonight, so if you could please come to the mic to ask your question. That way everyone in the room and everyone online can hear your question. After the program, we'll have an author signing outside. Our good friends Urban Read Bookstore is here as our on-site bookseller. Please do us and them a favor, buy a book. I have always said that you can't have your library book signed. We won't take it back. We just won't. It always gets like a sad laugh. One or two other things. I would be remiss not to talk about our author schedule for the fall, September and October. You can grab a flyer, or if you'd like, a copy of Compass, our promotional magazine. We have 28 programs still to go throughout December. I'm very excited about this. 1968 gold medal Olympiast Tommy Smith coming next week. Tommy Smith, you may remember, after he won the gold medal, he raised his fist in the air. Him and John Carlos, he'll be here to talk about his life with young adult best-selling author Derek Barnes. Will be in conversation. It's going to be a special event. I hope you can make it out. The final thing, and then I'll get out of the way, is that we have a new initiative here at the Pratt. We're offering free parking for all our author programs over at the Franklin Street Garage. So if you get here at 4 o'clock, anytime 4 o'clock and after, you park in Franklin Street, you tell me, I'll give you a voucher, free parking. Trying to solve that problem, because I've heard from a lot of people that parking has always been an issue. So I'm aware of it, we're aware of it, and we're solving it. So to try to get people back here in the Pratt for our author programs. So with all that said, I will get out of the way and we'll start in a couple minutes, okay? Thanks for coming out.
Looking forward to it.
After receiving her MA in statistics, Verdelle moved to Brooklyn, New York, and founded a statistics consulting firm in 1988. She is also a prize-winning first novelist. The Good Negress was published to considerable acclaim in 1999 and released in paperback in 1996. Nobel laureate Toni Morrison called the novel, quote, truly extraordinary, unquote. Verdelle has taught creative writing at Princeton University and Vermont College, and she teaches in the MFA program at Lesley University. In 2010, she was featured in the documentary Cheating the Stillness, chronicling the life of Julia Peterkin, who in 1929 was the first American woman to be awarded the Pulitzer Prize. Peterkin wrote several novels about Black life in the plantation South, and her perspectives were searingly intimate, and some readers thought that she must be African American. Verdelle had studied Peterkin Overture and featured her novel Scarlet Sister Mary in the narrative Interior of the Good Negress. Verdelle has received awards from the following. She was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. She was a finalist for the Penn Faulkner Award. She received the Verdelle Award of the American Academy of Arts and Letters and the Whiting Award in 1996. This evening, A.J. Verdelle will discuss her latest work, Miss Chloe. Please join me in welcoming A.J. Verdelle to Baltimore and the Pratt Library.
Hello.
Hey everyone. It's so good to be here. It's rainy outside. We were just talking about how dramatic it is a little bit. It's nice to be in the historic Enoch Pratt Free Library of Baltimore, across the street from America's first basilica. I'm very excited to be here with a colleague who's had a series of amazing experiences, journeys, and I wonder if we could open up by you just saying a little bit about what the journey of writing the book was like. What was the process like? And just give us a little window into that.
So did they tell you this is Harold Morales? This is Harold Morales, and he is in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Morgan. So I wanted him to come here with me, and I appreciate that he said yes. One other situational note, I was told there would be no podium. So I'm like out here like, what? There's a podium. So I've rearranged my whole thought process about this. And there's a podium. I didn't have to do that. But anyway, so yes, I wrote this book called Miss Chloe about the number of years that I spent engaging with Toni Morrison. And this is my second book. My first book was called The Good Negress. I have exhibits. I have an excuse for this bag. So this is a little paperback of my first book called The Good Negress, which is the little book that could, because it came to Toni Morrison's notice. She wrote into the publisher and said it was truly extraordinary, and they had to take the cover off the press and do all this fancy stuff. But after she said the book was truly extraordinary, she had her secretary call and say, I would like for you to come and see me in New York. And it was the first time I'd entered the world of the people where they call you and you come, wherever you are from. You just make your way there. So I was in New Orleans when she called, and we made a date for later in the summer. And so the little book that could got me to Toni Morrison. And then I went and met her later in that summer. It was a very scary experience. I had to get there really early. I walked up and down the street to make sure I'd be on time and to make sure I knew where to ring the buzzer. It was an amazing experience. I went there thinking it would be a one-off, like I would see her that one time. And turned out to be the beginning of a 17-year relationship. But the reason I wanted to start with The Good Negress is because I tell my students all the time, you get extra credit for showing up in bad weather. that when the weather turns and you show up for a job interview, your chances of getting the job are much higher because you've shown up in bad weather. When I was on tour with the Good Negress many years ago, I went to a bookstore in Cleveland and it was snowing and there was one person at the reading. And I was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with this one person? I can still see her face. And she said, well, I'm interested in writing and I came to hear you read and I wish you would read. So I had to read to one person in a Cleveland bookstore in the snow. But I said to myself, A, she gets extra credit for showing up in bad weather. And good. B, you said you wanted to write this book. Reading is what you do when you write a book. So read to the lady. So I read to the lady and she was young and very kind. And we talked about writing for about 25 minutes after I read to her for 25 minutes. And then the conversation, the bookstore owner came over and the conversation changed and they started asking me about what it was like to be Black, which is what happens when you sit around white people for a while by yourself. And so I was like, time to go. And that was the end of that. But this book has been in print for 27 years. So it is the little book that could. And it's brought me amazing experiences, including the experience of Toni Morrison. And so when I was writing this book, I felt like she was breathing over my shoulder. And I felt like the book has to be written well enough to be a book about Toni Morrison. So I really did sweat it a lot. And I wrote as well as I could. And I love how how writing this book helped me process some earlier experiences. For example, I met Nina Simone when I was finishing graduate school. And I knew I was going to the concert. It was a big return to the performance space for Nina Simone. So I thought, if I have a chance to ask her anything, what will I ask her? And I was 27 years old when that concert happened. And I hung around backstage with my little flowers and they invited me back and I asked the questions that I was prepared to ask. And after a little while, she turned to her manager who was standing there and she says, find out what she wants. And so I said, oh, Miss Simone, I just wanted to say how much you've influenced me and I'm glad to meet you. And that was another sort of time to go. And as I turned to left, the guy said, you want to come to London? I'm going to put you on the will call list at our concert in London. You come to London, it's this date next month. Come, you can hang out with us. I'm like, yeah, right. I'm a graduate student. I'm not going to London. But anyway, so meeting Nina Simone and having to think, what would I say? What would I say? What do I have to say? And to Nina Simone, I said, I grew up on your music. My mother listened to your music. I wish I knew how it would feel to breathe. Be Free was like my anthem. And I later met James Brown and I did the same thing. What am I going to ask him? What am I going to ask him? What would I say? And to James Brown, I said, you know, Mr. Brown, he's a very short man. He's way shorter than me. Mr. Brown, you've influenced everybody. How do you feel responsible? How do you feel about that? He said, I know I raised all y'all. I raised every one of you. So y'all know what to do and I'm proud of you. I was like, wow. I had a question, he had an answer. Okay, I can die now. Anyway, so, you know, thinking, that's what prepared me for that meeting with Toni Morrison. Like, what am I gonna say? What am I gonna say? What if it's this way? What if it's that way? And then finally, it was what it was. And at the end of the meeting, and I tell this story in great length at the book, at the end of the meeting, she kind of like hijacked my outfit.
Your
like,
scarf.
My scarf.
Yeah.
I had on my beautiful, favorite, lovely New York scarf. And she's like, I need that. And I handed it off. I gave it to her. Very interesting.
This is a special scarf, though. They're very functional. You use it in many different ways. I wonder if you could say a little bit about the meaning and significance of that request on Toni Morrison's behalf.
Well, see, the thing is, especially in New York, right? A scarf is like an ascot. right? So you can be very plain and then you whip out your scarf at 6:30 and you're like, I'm ready for the evening. And it was my favorite scarf. It was my colors. It was assigned to different, to really dress me up. But I'm also a bandana girl. So it was like a big bandana, keep me warm or just make me look nice or make me secure in my bag. Anyway, Toni Morrison, I think, was testing me. You know, she was kind of trying to figure out, are you going to respond to me? Are you going to make me holler your name from the back of the auditorium? Or are you going to pay attention and see what I want and see what I need and keep me from being ambushed and that whole thing? So it was this whole dance of, are you going to read me? Are you going to be looking? Can I walk around with you and know that you'll like get between me and a bullet?
I was thinking about this, right? So like you're preparing for this meeting with Toni Morrison, and you're going through it and thinking about what you're gonna say, what you're gonna wear, and you show up and you imagine all these possible scenarios in terms of where the topics could go, and this kind of comes out of left field a little bit, and I wonder if this was something that she did in other occasions as well, surprising sort of moves like this.
Yeah, well, she was nothing if not surprising. And I think she was surprising in part because she was a genius. And so her mind just was like, everybody else is like, and she's like flipping all around with her mind. But I think also she could take shortcuts, right? So she's like going after my favorite scarf to see how far I'm going to go and to see if she can push me and to see if she has to be super explicit. And I think the reason I'm advocating thinking about the people you're going to meet is because they're sort of always testing you. I mean, they're ambushed, right? By people.
Yeah.
And so they want to have, and she was cryptic anyway. She was funny, she was cryptic, and she was surprising. Once at Princeton, at Princeton, they have this convention because, you know, it's very posh and wealthy and nobody does anything wrong. And so you have this convention that when you're in the office, even if you've stepped away, you leave your door slightly ajar and you don't worry, nobody's going to take anything. But so I had stepped down the hall, I was coming back down the hall, and I hear Morrison like singing my name, AJ, and I'm like, oh my God, Toni Morrison. So I come around the corner, and she says, do you want to go to lunch? And I'm like, do we have time to go to lunch? She was like, do you want to go to lunch? I was like, well, I have a class at 1. She was like, you have enough time. It was like 12:30.
Right.
You have enough time. I'm like, so, you know, thinking. I'm like, yes, you have a class, but when is the next time Toni Morrison is going to invite you to lunch, right? So I go down, I get a piece of paper, I say, I'll be back at 2:00. I go to lunch with Toni Morrison. But before we go, I'm trying to hedge because I want to make my class. And I say, well, I made tuna. I brought tuna. I have it on my desk. I'll share that with you. And she said, I tasted it. I don't like it. So that was surprising, right?
Yeah. But so this is it, right? So like I remember in my undergraduate courses, the prompts were around how do you say something without saying it directly. So there's this idea of like shortcuts, and we could get to the idea quicker. And sometimes when we try to take those shortcuts, I end up like fumbling things around, and I don't communicate clearly. And it takes a sort of intuition and genius to be able to take those shortcuts well. And I wonder, right, so like how often this would happen in conversation with Toni Morrison. And there was this one part in the book that really stood out for me where you were referring to this genius and presence and gravitas that she had, that where there was an ongoing argument and conversation going, and she would enter into it and just bring it to an end with one word Yeah.
Like, for example, my favorite example of that is, I think I might have been complaining about Kanye West. Why? Why even bother, right? But I was complaining about Kanye West, and I extrapolated to rap, and I don't know, I was just whining about the music, and she's like, every generation hates the next generation's music. Any other questions you have?
It's kind of like,
kind of,
it's
she's like,
definitive. It's,
yeah, boom, done.
Yeah.
Well, next subject.
Next, time to,
Time to move on.
And then, so like, and that's what I was like drawn to throughout your book. There's so many of these moments that we have with Toni Morrison in the public, and that you had with her as a friend. How do you make these difficult choices of what to include in a book like this and what to exclude? What's that process like? And it seems like very difficult to have to make a choice after another when writing a book, and having to live with that. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the weights of that.
Well, my process of writing is kind of like what musicians talk about improvising, where you try to empty yourself of an idea. And then that emptiness gives room for the next idea.
Yeah.
So in writing, I call it afterthoughts, but it's like I'll write something down and I'll get it as formed as I can make it, especially if I send it to somebody, then it'll be like, oh, I need to add this. So what happened with this book is I would write down a memory and it would bring another memory. It would sort of make space for another memory. And they were mostly silent, which was kind of amazing to me, because in her life, her voice was a thing. It was gruff, it was husky, it was cryptic. Yeah. And when I was remembering her, it was like silent film, which I found a little bit fascinating.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it was trying to sort of give me the idea creatively that memories do go away, right? They do change. They do become more elusive and harder to grasp. Yeah. So work hard on nailing these memories down now.
Right. There was an urgency. There was,
But also, though, with Morrison being someone I knew and could hear, and I'm writing about this amazing writer, I felt a lot of heat and pressure to just write and write. Like, I noticed a note from my editor that said, write the hell out of it. Right. So she could see me like trying to push, but not really. But, when I finally got it to the point where I thought it contains everything it's going to contain. And to answer your question, there are a few things that are too intimate that she would kind of come back on a broomstick and like turn me into dust or something if I told. So a couple of those, and I talk about a few of our spats. I mean, we had actually a regular relationship, which was surprising to me because I was sort of in awe of her. So I thought I would never have any kind of spat with her. Yeah. But, she was so wealthy and everything by the time I knew her, right? So some of the things that concerned her, I thought were a little golden. So every once in a while I would say, well, I'm glad that you had the money to do X. And she would be like,
Beside that.
Yeah. But how much can you listen to somebody who's sort of a millionaire complaining about money things? It's like,
so right. So then it becomes interesting in terms of like those decision-making processes, what to include, what not to, including these kinds of spats. And it's interesting to me hear you say right now that a lot of the memories were coming to you silently, and then how do you write the hell out of silence, right? And just coming in and zooming into the scene, and it makes it feel cinematic, and then it brings my memories of reading the book into a different light.
Well, when you're a creative writer, you are writing anything out of silence. I mean, you're starting with a blank page. The characters that you're imagining, they live in your mind. They don't live in anybody else's mind. So when somebody notices that your character has on cute shoes, or your character has a cute haircut, or your character, did a great job at the craft fair, that's because you turned it from silent and invisible to what they're seeing, but there's really nothing there but ink.
That's neat. So and then thinking about these silences that you bring to life through choices, word choices. Some of the more difficult choices that I imagine are in naming your characters and bringing them to life, and the way that those names shape their qualities, what they might or might not do, and vice versa. I wonder if you could say a little bit about the decision-making process for the title of your book, and also just, it keeps coming back as this theme throughout the text, the importance of naming.
Yeah, so I don't know if there are Toni Morrison readers here, but Toni Morrison was like the queen of naming characters. And I have a little section on that in this book. But she had a character named Heed the Night. The dog in Beloved is named Here Boy, which is like genius, naming a dog Here Boy, especially in a pre-literate era, right? So these are enslaved people whose language doesn't translate to the page. So of course they would call their dog Here Boy, right? And then Morrison does this other amazing thing with naming, because also in our pre-literate eras, we as African Americans or enslaved people, you'd open the Bible and you'd put your finger on a word that had a capital letter, a high letter. And that could be a possible name for your kid, for your child that you had. And Morrison used that, and in naming her characters, and she also used it showing it how it could go wrong, because the protagonist or heroine of Song of Solomon is named Pilate, after the person who persecuted Jesus. And one of the other characters, who's the daughter of a rich man in town, her name is First Corinthians. So Morrison is like showing how this works at the same time as showing how it doesn't work, which is kind of part of the genius of her ability to talk about many things at once. Now, in terms of this title, her name was Chloe, and I learned that early. I remember learning it like almost from an encyclopedia, and we don't even hardly have those anymore. But I was reading her books when I was a young teenager, and when I went to learn about her, I learned that her name was Chloe, which I thought was very cool. And then when it became clear after that first meeting that I was going to be seeing her, I had this problem of what am I going to call her? And I would be practicing in my mind, what's the best thing to call her? Because I'm not going to call her Toni, because she's 30 years older than me. She already had a Nobel when I met her. She was like, she might as well have been wearing a cape. She was a superhero to me. So I wasn't going to be like Toni, you know. And Miss Morrison, everybody called her Miss Morrison. Miss Morrison is not, you know, Miss Morrison, Miss Morrison. And I thought, I'm going to see if she'll let me call her Miss Chloe. And the reason I thought it was cool was because it's like a neighborhood thing. It's like when you grow up around somebody who's not related to you, but you better respect them and you better do what they say and you better speak to them when they pass, right? And these are like the cadre of people who are really teaching you, even though they're not your mom or your aunt, right? They're the people who say, pull that dress down, or go in the house and did you do your homework, or whatever, right? It's the ladies in the neighborhood, or, you know, your grandparents' friends or whatever. And then I did get her to accept being called Miss Chloe, which I thought was great. And it didn't take much negotiation. She only looked at me brightly for a second and then kind of resolved it again.
But she was surprised.
She was surprised.
It's your turn to
the first
surprise her. Yeah.
Exactly. But then I realized that she never would have been a Miss Chloe, because when she was ready to go to college, her mother wanted her to go to Oberlin, which was 7 miles away. And she didn't want to go because she was like, she'll be telling me to come home on the weekends and do the laundry. And, you know, it'll be the same old, same old. I want to go somewhere where I can read. That's what her thing. I want to go somewhere where I can read. What she means is read uninterrupted, I think. But anyway, so she went off to Howard. And then when she went to Howard, she never came back. She went to editing. She went to Texas first. She got a master's in Cornell. She just never came back. And it's to the neighborhood that you're Miss whoever you are. You know, Miss Pat or Miss Brenda or Miss Dorothy, right? So because she was gone, she actually never really had that. So I was like, oh,
Ooh, yeah.
So that goes back to the thinking. The reason I bring this up is because
that's good.
you know, we're all connected. Nobody could have told me when I was 20 or 10 that I was going to meet Toni Morrison and be her friend. If they had said that, I would have been like, yeah, fairy tales are cool, you know? And I knew the difference between a story and a fairy tale and a novel and whatever. Nobody could have told me that. But the reality is that if you are ready for who you meet, even if they're your hero, and you're very likely to meet your hero because you're going to follow them around. That's what I do. You know, I follow people around who I'm interested in, who I respect, who I can maybe, you know, they can sprinkle pixie dust on me or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you decide, okay, all the time though, what am I going to say if I meet them then? What am I going to say if I get to talk to Nina Simone? What am I going to call her if she invites me to see her again? What if, you know, and when I went there that first time, I thought there were going to be a lot of people.
It was, yeah.
And it was just her and me. And we were in this Tribeca loft, big, like huge, like money. And it was all white. The furniture was all white. There was nothing on the walls. I was like, oh, maybe she likes white. But then after a while, I found out she had just bought it. Like, I wish I knew, like, was I visitor number 3? No, I don't know. I'm just kidding. But it was empty because she had just bought it. I can't imagine buying a Tribeca loft, but still, I was in one.
Yeah, so you're in there. It's just you and her, and you've been thinking about all these questions.
That's right.
And
I had questions about books. And that's what I learned about her, that if you want to be friends with Toni Morrison, you have to know her work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably true of everyone, you know, like Kanye wouldn't be interested in me because I don't know his work, you know. But I knew Toni Morrison's books. I asked her questions about them. I had one of the actually greatest nights of my life with her because I thought about all these moments in my favorite of her books. And I was trying to figure out, is it imagination or technique, which makes a big difference for writers, because imagination, that's on you, right? Do you write down your dreams? Do you wake yourself up abruptly? Do you encourage your own imagination? Blah, blah, blah. But technique, it can be taught. This is how you build a chair. This is how you make a dress. This is how you model, right? So I started asking her these questions and she started answering technique. And I was like, what? And I just kept, and I was like, okay, I got this. I'm learning this.
Yeah. That's a really good connection. And I want to keep thinking about that and hope we can keep returning to it. I was thinking also in terms of naming, when we give someone a name, it helps to kind of put out their hopes and dreams for that relationship, what it might develop into and what it could be. And so when you came up with this name, it came at a time in your life where you were very familiar with her works, right? And you were able to establish that relationship in part because of that familiarity, and knowing the importance and how well she did naming in her works. And so there was a little bit of, it seems like a little bit of gravitas to the decision-making process when what you were going to call her, and a surprise on her part, and then a kind of moving forward with the relationship. And how do you think that helped to shape the contours of what continued to grow?
Yeah, no, I think she could see that I was thinking about writing and thinking about words. I mean, when you're writing, I don't know if there are writers in the audience, but when you write and you name your characters, you're basically consigning your characters to grow into that name, even if it's only what you think that name represents. But as a writer, you really should look up what you're naming your characters. And I think it's true also in life. When we name our children, we are naming for what we hope they might become. I had the experience, I talk a lot in this book about my experience with dictionaries. And one dictionary, I had a list of names in the back and what those names meant. And I found out that Angela, which is my first name, means messenger. I think I was 12. I was like, messenger, I'll take it. And so this idea that your name is meaning something and that it could have a meaning in your life, if you agree to that, then that's kind of like, if you buy into what your own name represents, then that's kind of like aspiration right there. I mean, it gives you a place to be aiming all the time. And that's how we make decisions, right? Supposedly. What am I aiming for? Does this suit? If the answer is yes, okay. If the answer is no, well, maybe later. So if you accept the meaning of your name or the association of your name as an aspiration, then it really very conveniently can help with your decision making.
Yeah, it could help give us directions, and in other ways, it could also limit. And so then there's this possibility of renaming as well and taking ownership or deciding what, right, of that naming we want to inherit and celebrate.
Yeah, I mean, even though late in her life, there are a few film clips of Morrison, and she seems to be suggesting I should not have given up my name that way that she did. But her problem was that nobody pronounced it. They used to call her Cholo or Cole or Chol or Choli, just like all these weird. And I saw something that was saying I was coming to read where it was spelled right in one place and wrong in the other.
Okay.
So
still,
spelled wrong,
yeah.
and just so she was tired of dealing with a name that nobody could get right. And I could see that, but it's a beautiful name. I think it's just like the cutest name in the world, Chloe.
Yeah, no, and it's cool that you got to be able to celebrate that.
And I got to be able to say it and say it and say it.
Yeah.
Like, who would think that you get to say Chloe all the time? Now people are named after her.
Yeah, that's
But,
it. Yeah.
But back then, nobody was really saying it. So
My middle name is Daniel, and my mom really wanted me to be like someone who saw dreams and interpret them and things like that. And so it's very aspirational on her end. And so I think about that connection between, what are those dreams? What are the ways in which we articulate those dreams, and then how they shape what's possible?
Right.
And
And
I
you
think
got to buy into it.
You got to, yeah.
Certainly. Like you buy into your mother's choice of Daniel.
I gotta make
buy
that choice.
into the whole messenger thing. But people change their names for other reasons. Like she said she liked Toni because she was confirmed Saint Anthony. And Saint Anthony is the saint of books and lost things.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
And she felt that our history was lost. So that's what she wrote about, like all the eras of our past and what knowledge had been removed.
Yeah.
So she was buying into Anthony as, she just didn't want to have a man's name, but she was buying into that as aspiration. Malcolm X, on the other hand, he wasn't going for it. His last name was Little. He had been a hoodlum, and he'd come out of prison as like this great orator. So he wanted to signify something else. So he made a choice of a name that fit his aspirations. So.
Yeah. I wonder if on that note, right, so thinking about aspirations, names, words, and the conditions for being able to dream, and as we find ourselves in this beautiful library, what comes to mind are these passages in your book. I think of the way that you write about libraries and these containers of so many words and the conditions and possibilities for dreaming. For so many kids, I remember spending so many hours in libraries back where I grew up in LA, and it allowed me to dream in ways that I couldn't have done without them. And you write very beautifully of libraries as these monuments in cities, these pillars, these central locations that are holy, sacred spaces almost. So I wonder if you could perhaps read a little bit to us about libraries.
Yeah, so on the back cover of this book, they picked up this sentence that I wrote: if you let a Black girl loose in a library, you may not recognize the woman who emerges. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, why did they pick that one? Because of the loose, let her loose. It made me nervous to have it. But that's the thing you have to do, though. You can't just be tepidly suggesting the library. You got to say, I'll be back in 5 hours. And that's how that library awakening comes up. But I'm going to read you a little bit of a story about a very special library, and let's see if you recognize anything. So Carla Hayden, who is the 14th Librarian of Congress, currently holds the top librarian job in these United States. That has to have some standing beyond the world of books. Dr. Hayden is both the first woman and the first African American to be appointed and sworn in as Librarian of Congress. Since 1802, we have had Librarians of Congress, but we have our first actual professional librarian in Dr. Carla Hayden. The Library of Congress has grown during her tenure. More resources are reachable by digital connection, and young people and varied audiences are encouraged to come and experience the astounding brick and mortar main building named for Thomas Jefferson, who donated his personal library as the foundation for the Library of Congress collection. His books are still there, encased and observable from a distance. At Morgan State, where I teach, we have a program funded by the Mellon Foundation, named after African-American historian Benjamin Quarles. Dr. Quarles wrote Black history when we were barely writing. He was a pioneer uncovering our true American history and committing his discoveries to print. Dr. Quarles taught history at Morgan for decades, and the Quarles program helps prepare students for possible application to PhDs. They are a small, energetic, intellectually dynamic group of students. As part of their fellowship year, we traveled to DC to the Library of Congress to meet with Dr. Hayden. She is a real raconteur, quiet as it's kept. When she was looking for her first job after college, Carla Hayden spent her days in downtown Chicago to interview, to take employment exams. They don't have those anymore, but you used to have to take a test. And to study listings in the newspapers. Between appointments, she would go to the downtown library. While there, wearing her interview attire, she would scour newspapers for additional opportunities. After seeing her over a period of time, dressed and poised and consistent, the librarians who worked there inquired about her project or her activities or her intentions. Because of her presentation and her consistency, she was invited to apply to the library. They hired her. That Chicago Public Library job changed the trajectory of Carla Hayden's life and the trajectory of our nation. Now she directs the most important library in our country. She has jokingly referred to herself as an accidental librarian, though of course she has been intentional from the Chicago hiring moment on. Dr. Hayden has been at the helm of multiple local or municipal libraries throughout her career. She directed the Enoch Pratt Free Library System in Baltimore before ascending to the helm at the Library of Congress. Appointed by President Obama, Hayden has led the library to better mirror its collections and its constituents. In Library of Congress auditoriums, my Morgan students have seen Joy Harjo, Tracy K. Smith, Jacqueline Woodson, Jason Reynolds, and Amanda Gorman when she was 19 and National Youth Poet Laureate. Dr. Hayden revealed to my students that you can borrow much more from libraries than books. At some libraries, she reports, you can charge out a suit or an umbrella or even decks of cards. You can borrow what the library has to circulate, if you will, but find out. Important library stories backdrop the lives of writers and readers and scholars and regular people everywhere. These stories too should be collected, curated, and published. Libraries change lives.
Absolutely.
In Hayden's era at the Library of Congress, ambassadors for young people's literature model how libraries can welcome and invigorate young people, even with screens as competition. Children and young adults need to pass through massive open doors. Even in the 21st century, young people deserve the critical experiences of finding, exploring, and confronting knowledge finding ways to advance themselves without needing a credit card, exploring ideas on their own. Knowledge always beckons if you know what beckon means. A library aligns with the human mind. The internet aligns with keystrokes. There is no comparison. The human mind is organic, energetic, and infinite. It takes a human mind to tame or loose a human mind. The internet is young and relates to the mind in only the narrowest ways. A library demands that you learn your sources, their finding tools. You have to think and wade through material in order to find exactly what you're looking for. The internet is vast, but it's not processed and it's not vetted. Using the internet for all questions is like researching by putting your hand down into a dark barrel. You may retrieve a dill pickle. You may retrieve a frog. You may encounter a sleeping snake. Now, what were you looking for? At the library, when you go for pickles, you will find instructions for brining, commentary on cucumbers, a treatment on the process of preserving. You will be told what kind of barrel you need if you need one. You will likely be told how to keep animals out of your pickling juice. At the library, the emphasis is on expertise, classification, and untangling truth. The internet is barely classified and definitely unmoored. The internet coughs up information with the randomness and uniformity of polka dots. The library will hold things down for you. The only way you get a frog or a snake is if that's what you go searching for. You will find these materials in subject order and alphabetical by author within. If you let a Black girl loose in a library, you may not recognize the woman who emerges.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful.
Q&A?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I wonder if we could open it up to Q&A if anyone has any questions.
15 minutes for Q&A. Again, if you could bring your questions to the microphone so the virtual audience can also hear them. Thank you.
Oh, you have a question?
I'm fine. I think everyone can hear me. My question is, did you ever get your scarf back?
No.
And if you didn't, I'd love to buy you one.
Oh.
So, this is my mom. No, I did not get my scarf back. And I'm still a little bit miffed about it after all these years, but I was more miffed before she passed. It took me a long time to get over, even though I know what it was for. Morrison did bring me a scarf. I talk about it in the book. She and I were both sort of interested in France. So she went to France and she brought me a scarf from France, but it was like totally not my color, not the same, it just, I almost felt like, did you even notice my scarf that you took from me? I mean, like this, but anyway, I do treasure it. But no, I'm never going to have that scarf again. And it's just a woeful situation.
So we have a question from our online audience.
Okay.
If you could have known ahead of time that you were walking into Toni Morrison's new place, what would you have brought for a housewarming gift, if anything?
Right. Well, Toni Morrison loved flowers, and she was very vocal about it. She would call you on the phone and say, "Send me some flowers." And it costs a lot of money to get flowers that she's gonna like, that are not like chrysanthemums, and then get them up to her place on the Hudson in New York. I mean, Lord have mercy, send me some flowers. So if I had known that then, I think I probably would have taken her a very low arrangement of flowers with calla lilies, and something else really lush. But that comes from knowing her. I think I actually took the thing that I thought she would want the most, which was a rap about her work. And I mean, my experience proved 90 times over that that's what really, really engaged her and made her happy. And as a writer, I think I probably understand that. Like when somebody says something to me about something on page 431 of some obscure thing, it's like, what?
Yeah.
You know that,
Yeah.
right? Or I did an interview with these two guys who do this thing, books or pop culture. And they said we buddy read the book. So Harold and I would decide we're going to read the book together, and two of you. And so they had all these quotes, and they would say, so you said, and they would read the quote and ask me to respond to it. And every time I would want to say, what page is that on? Because they would excise these beautiful sentences that I had never considered separately. So I think as a writer, and that's what I mean, you have to really think about who you're going to see, I went to see a musician one time, and I brought a little toy from the grocery store, xylophone, where you hit the thing. Great present.
Great present.
So you just have to kind of, I'm saying this and it sounds like I'm saying something really basic, but it's basic and true and real. If you think you're going to meet somebody that you really admire, give it some time, because you can come up with something that's going to make them feel like, oh, somebody is paying attention to what I do. Who is this person? Maybe we should go have dinner.
So what might be a really thoughtful gift for you from the audience, if anyone's interested? Yeah. What are the kinds of things that you might?
I love bookmarks.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And I collect letter openers, even though I'm a disaster at opening my mail. So it's like, what is the point of the letter openers? But I do have them from various countries.
Neat. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I have a question about some advice you got in your book from Toni Morrison. And it was about where you were going to have your baby.
Yeah.
And she said, you can tell more about the story if you want, but she said, they can't tell you where you're going to have your baby. And my question was, when we get advice, sometimes we can't take it in. When you got that advice, did you immediately say yes, or did you sort of quiver and say, is she right? Is this okay?
Yeah, and can I add, because there's another place where Toni Morrison gives you a different bit of advice in terms of publishing, and there's a similar kind of wrestling that you have to do. Do you accept the advice immediately, or do you kind of sit with it for a bit? Yeah, what's the life of that?
Right.
That's a great question.
Well, there's really nothing more immediate than pregnancy. Like, you'd be hard to find something that could go over top of that. And so there I am arguing with my Pulitzer Prize winning white Princeton poet supervisor. And he's like, no, you can't have the time off. And I'm like, why? And he's like, because Princeton doesn't give that kind of maternity leave. And I'm like, okay, am I going to talk to him about maternity leave? But he was the boss, and he was like saying, no, you can't go. And I had bought a house. I had published The Good Negress, the little book that could. I got paid $8,000, which is nothing, when I sold the hardcover. But then when they sold the paperback, it sold for like 20 times that. So I bought a house. And it was in New Orleans, and I had planned to have my baby in New Orleans. And in between all of that, I ended up at Princeton. But just for the semester where I was having the baby, I wanted to go back to New Orleans. And he was like, no. So I thought it was a little bit inappropriate. And, all the regular people kind of say, go to HR. And I was like, oh. So I just called her to ask her what she thought. And she said, they can't tell you where to have your baby. So that was another one of those.
Yeah.
Like, what are you even thinking?
End the conversation.
End the conversation. So I hung up the phone and I called the guy and I was like, I'm going to New Orleans. And if you want me to come back in September, you can let me know, but I'm going to New Orleans. Boom, done, finished. And it was immediate because I was like, but Harold is referencing when I was writing this book about Black cowboys, and I was writing it 15 years ago. Nobody wanted to hear about Black cowboys then. Turns out that 1 in 4 cowboys was Black. Who knew? So, I'm researching, I'm writing. The cowboy has a partner who is also a cowboy or a cowgirl or whatever. I draft this whole big, long thing. And the publishing industry is just like, change this, change that, change this, do this, do that, do this, do. So I go around and around and around until my said baby becomes a teenager. And I'm like, I am not going to spend her adolescence arguing with you. So I just kind of like, nix, and I put the cowboy book aside. But when I was working on it, Morrison, because my agent died in the whole process of this. And I said, Morrison, I need a new agent. She's like, you do not need an agent, you need a lawyer. And I was like, really? And she said, Bill Clinton never used an agent. Bill Clinton did his whole book, just a lawyer. And I'm like, I'm not Bill Clinton. So that advice, I just kind of ignored. I just was like, I'm not Bill Clinton. But I think she was just talking at her level. I mean, every lawyer is not a Bill Clinton level lawyer. You could get a different lawyer that fits you, that you can, but I didn't think about that. All I could think of was, I'm not Bill Clinton. So it took me a long time. But now I have a lawyer.
Now you have a lawyer. Yeah.
I have a question. It's a yes or no question, I'm sorry, but it's going to be 2. I was wondering when you were talking about names and also just like in general in your writing process and in the process of knowing Toni Morrison, did you ever witness her writing? And I'm wondering if you know, does she say her characters' names out loud? And do you talk like your dialogue out loud? Because like if I named somebody like Here Boy or First Corinthians, Here Boy all the time.
So there's no yes, no question in that. This is my daughter. This is my baby born in New Orleans. Yes, I saw her writing. And I remember like she was writing with a big long pencil. And you know how you can hear a pencil? I was like, you're going to levitate. You better. So I was just trying to pull myself. So yes, I saw her writing. Yes, I heard her say names out loud. I never heard her say Heed the Night out loud, though, and that's like the weirdest of the names. But when you study Toni Morrison's names, you almost know not to ask a lot of questions because it's so obviously this like careful process of choosing, like Joe Trace. There's this woman, Violet, who people start calling her violent because she tried to kill somebody, right? Violet is violent, it's very, very astounding, her naming situation. No yes, no in that at all. Go right ahead.
This will be our last question for the evening.
Okay, thank you.
I will. It's a brief question then. You mentioned in your book too that you spend a lot of time reading, you're reading to yourself. And so I wondered if there were any words that while you're reading, you're pronouncing them to yourself in a way that is pronounced differently from sort of the regular pronunciation. I remember being a kid and there's a friend and I, and we're in the car, we're reading aloud together. And I think we're in middle school and we start off the book and we kept talking about the preface. And my mom finally, this is going on for several minutes. She's like, all right, it's great you all are reading. She's like, you're just saying it wrong. And so just, as somebody who read so much, what words were there that you had pronounced differently in your own head?
Yeah. Well, having been a teacher for years now, I applaud people who mispronounce words because what that means is they're learning them from reading, right? They've not heard it, but they've encountered it, and then they're trying to say it even though they're saying it wrong. So that's a joy, right? You're encountering something new, right? On the first page of this book, there's a word that is pronounced eidolon, but I always think of it as eidolon, and I think it sounds prettier as eidolon, and I have to force myself not to mispronounce it, but my musical daughter's like, think colon, so I get it, eidolon, right? But I always used to say thesaurus, no, thesaurus. I don't know which is wrong, but I used to say the wrong one, right? And I also had a hard time learning how to say inventory. Is that the way you say it? I used to say inventory all the time. Inventory.
That sounds
So,
me
yeah, it sounds, I mean,
too.
sometimes I like the way it sounds better wrong, but you're not allowed, right?
Yeah.
And I think if I had known when I chose it, eidolon is a word that Whitman uses. And so I was trying to sort of tie Morrison into the American canon in a subtle way. All the scholars get it, but regular people, it's more subtle. But anyway, I think if I had known it was eidolon, I might not have chosen it. I still love that I chose it, and I chose it for the Whitman reason, but it's like an everlasting eidolon in my mind. It's like, that's why it's there.
Great question.
Great question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for being more people than Cleveland. I appreciate it.
And thank you, AJ.
Thank you.
So this was really great. I love the conversation.
Thank you so much.
So we have books outside for purchase and signing. So please purchase your book and get your book signed. And again, thank you all for coming out. Hope to see you again at some of our other
Can I show my one last exhibit?
events.
I forgot.
Sure.
Can you see it says, find me at the library?
Oh, that is cool.
Yes, this is my exhibit. I didn't want to dress down this much, otherwise I would have worn it. But anyway, please
Library is
go
a
to the
great
library.
place to be,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Go to the library.
That's right. Go to the library. I spent a lot of time in the library. So thank you all for coming out. And again, outside we have, she'll be so honored to sign your books.
Take good
And
care.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.